Lieutenant Hannah Foster stood on the roof of the Pentagon, her eyes scanning the horizon, her mind elsewhere. The air was thick with the typical Washington humidity, but today something felt different. Her communication device buzzed in her ear, snapping her out of her reverie. "Lieutenant Foster, we need you in the ops center." Now, a voice crackled through the comms. It was General Caldwell, his tone urgent. Hannah didn't question it. She turned sharply, her boots clicking against the concrete as she sprinted down the stairs and into the bustling command center. It was chaos. "Report," Foster barked as she entered, her eyes locking on the flickering screens showing a dozen different views of Earth's cities under siege. "Ma'am, we've lost contact with Paris, New York, and Beijing. Reports are coming in from every major city, alien craft, large-scale destruction. The operations officer faltered. We're under attack, Lieutenant. Something massive is descending from the sky." Foster's stomach tightened. She took the seat at the command desk and stared at the main screen. An image of a dark, foreboding mass hovered above Washington, D.C., blocking out the sun. The alien ships, a grotesque, jagged amalgamation of black metal and pulsating energy, hovered like vultures in the sky, casting eerie shadows over the city. "What are we dealing with, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising panic within her. "Unknown, but they're not just here to intimidate. They're executing a systematic campaign. In every city they've attacked, we've seen executions. They're targeting government officials, military leaders, anyone with authority. It's chaos down there. Get me clearance to launch the fighter jets," Foster said, already knowing it was a futile request. She didn't need to be told that the alien ships were far beyond anything humanity could handle. "I'm afraid that's not an option," General Caldwell replied grimly. "We've tried. The alien ships are jamming all communications. The jets didn't even make it past the edge of the atmosphere before being shot down." Foster clenched her jaw. The gravity of the situation sank in. There was no going back now. The aliens weren't here for peace. They were here for destruction, and whatever humanity was up against, it was far more than they could ever have imagined. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the static of the radio feed. The broadcast was clear but chilling, the voice almost mechanical. "This is the Thal rays," it said, reverberating across every broadcast channel. "Your judgment has arrived. You will cease to exist by our hand, for your time has ended. The Omen Lords have decreed it." Foster's heart hammered in her chest. The Omen Lords. She had never heard the name before, but she could tell by the coldness in the voice that this was not a threat. They had already passed judgment. The end was near. The screen flickered, and the countdown began. Humanity had minutes, maybe hours, before everything they knew would be gone. The days that followed felt like a blur of terror and confusion. Washington, D.C. was a war zone. The streets were flooded with refugees, while the Thal rays carried out their brutal executions with terrifying efficiency. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. The world was collapsing under the weight of a relentless enemy, and the idea of a coordinated resistance seemed almost impossible. Yet, somehow, amid the chaos, something extraordinary began to stir. Lieutenant Hannah Foster found herself leading a small group of survivors in an underground bunker beneath the remains of the Pentagon. The team was a mix of military personnel, hackers, engineers, and civilians, people who had seen their lives ripped apart in the blink of an eye. But they were alive, and they were determined to fight back. "Intel's gone dark, ma'am," Sergeant Jake Morales, a former Special Forces operative, said as he ran his hands over the malfunctioning console. I can't even get a signal from the comms satellites. We're completely cut off from the outside world." Foster gritted her teeth. The Thal rays were efficient. They hadn't just attacked the cities. They had targeted the infrastructure, the global communications networks, and every military stronghold. It felt like they'd anticipated every move humanity could make. A flickering light above the table caught her attention. Julian Carter, a brilliant but disillusioned scientist, tapped rapidly on his laptop, his face lit by the screen's glow. "I'm not saying it's a solution, but I found something." "A potential weapon," Carter said, looking up from his work. His eyes were dark, tired. He had lost his wife in the first wave of attacks. Now, he only had one thing on his mind: vengeance. A weapon. Foster raised an eyebrow, trying to push back the sense of hopelessness creeping into her thoughts. What kind of weapon? "Not a conventional one," Carter replied, his fingers flying over the keys. "It's tied to something ancient. Something humanity left behind a long time ago. A relic hidden in the Nevada desert. But we don't know exactly what it is yet." Foster looked around at the faces of the survivors. A scientist, a soldier, a group of civilians who had no idea what they were getting into. Yet somehow they were still standing, still willing to fight. "We need to go to Nevada," Foster said, her voice steady despite the gnawing fear in her gut. "It's the only lead we've got." "Are you serious?" Morales asked. "The Thal rays are everywhere. The desert's crawling with their patrols." "I know," she replied, her eyes narrowing with determination. "But if we don't try, we're all dead anyway. And we need whatever it is that Carter found. We're running out of time." With no time to waste, the team quickly began preparations. They knew the odds were stacked against them. Their chances of survival were slim. But as Foster looked at the faces around her, strangers, survivors, all of them willing to risk it all, she knew one thing for certain: they would fight or they would die trying. In the silence of the underground bunker, the countdown on the screen continued to tick downward. Humanity's last hope rested on a desperate gamble in the heart of the desert. The Nevada desert was like a vast, empty graveyard, stretching endlessly under the harsh, unforgiving sun. Lieutenant Hannah Foster's team had travelled for days, dodging Thal rays patrols, and barely avoiding detection by staying off the main roads. Every moment felt like they were being hunted. But the goal was clear: find the relic, whatever it was, hidden deep within the ruins of an ancient outpost. And with every passing hour, their chances of success grew slimmer. "We're close," Carter said, his voice strained as he squinted at the map. His laptop had provided only fragmented data, and the further they ventured into the desert, the more unreliable their coordinates became. The ruins should be just ahead. Foster adjusted the straps of her gear, her fingers twitching toward the holster of her sidearm. Despite the heat, her skin felt clammy. She hated the waiting, hated the feeling of being exposed, vulnerable. But there was no turning back now. They approached an old military base, now little more than a skeleton of rusted steel and broken concrete. The place had once been a hub for secret research into extraterrestrial technology, but it had been abandoned for decades, forgotten by most of humanity. Until now. "Stay sharp," Foster ordered, scanning the horizon. "We know the Thal rays are active in the area. I don't want any surprises." The team moved cautiously, each step measured. Carter led the way, his eyes glued to the screen of his laptop, guiding them through the maze of wreckage. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, the oppressive silence grew louder. No birds, no insects, just the sound of their own breathing and the crunch of sand beneath their boots. Suddenly, Morales froze, his hand raised. The others stopped instantly. "I hear something," he whispered, his voice low. The group huddled together, instinctively drawing their weapons. They waited, every muscle tense. In the distance, the hum of alien technology reverberated through the ground, a deep, throbbing vibration that set their teeth on edge. The Thalrays were near. "I think we've got company," Morales said, his eyes scanning the horizon. Before anyone could react, a low growl echoed from behind them. Foster spun around, heart racing, but it was too late. From the shadows of the crumbling structures, a squad of Thalray soldiers emerged, their black armor glistening in the sunlight. The executioners, as ruthless as they were efficient, stopped toward the group with an unsettling calm. "We need to move. Now." Foster shouted, but it was already too late. The Thalrays had them trapped. Gunfire erupted, the crack of bullets and the hiss of energy weapons cutting through the air. Foster ducked behind a pile of debris, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her team returned fire, but it was like shooting at shadows. The Thalrays were too fast, too skilled. They moved like ghosts, slipping between cover with deadly precision. "Move! Move!" Foster barked, urging the others to fall back. They needed to regroup. They couldn't win this fight. They had to survive long enough to get to the relic. As the team retreated, Carter shouted, "It's inside." The relic's inside the central building. His voice was frantic, eyes wide with desperation. Foster hesitated for a split second. If they didn't get to the artifact now, they'd be dead. But if they stayed, they were all dead anyway. "Cover me," she yelled. Without waiting for an answer, she sprinted toward the building, gunfire whizzing past her, narrowly missing. Every step felt like it could be her last. But they had no choice. They had to get inside, and they had to find the weapon before the Thalrays destroyed them all. Just as she reached the door, a blast of alien energy hit the ground beside her, sending her crashing to the sand. Her vision blurred, pain shot through her leg, but she gritted her teeth and pulled herself up. There was no time for pain, no time for hesitation. The relic was the key, and they couldn't afford to fail. The interior of the old research facility was dark and damp, the air thick with dust, and the remnants of long-abandoned experiments. Foster limped through the corridor, her injured leg burning with every step, but there was no time to slow down. Carter, Morales, and the rest of the team pushed ahead, their weapons drawn, scanning every shadow for signs of movement. They had made it inside, but the Thalrays weren't far behind. "Clear," Morales said, his voice low as he rounded the corner. The room they entered was vast, filled with shattered glass and overturned equipment. On one side, an old metal door stood ajar, leading into a massive chamber at the heart of the facility. Carter's laptop beeped urgently, its screen flashing with a series of coordinates. He muttered to himself as he moved toward the center of the room. "This is it," he said, his voice breathless. "It's here. The relic, but we need to activate it. There's some kind of power core embedded inside the chamber." Foster took a step forward, her hand gripping the hilt of her weapon. "Then let's do it, Carter. The Thalrays won't give us much time." But as she spoke, the air seemed to shift. A strange pressure settled in the room, a sensation that sent chills down her spine. It wasn't just the heat of the desert outside. This was something else, something ancient. Carter's eyes widened as his fingers hovered over the holographic controls on his laptop. "Wait, there's more," he said, his voice trembling. This isn't just a weapon. It's a doorway." "A doorway?" Morales echoed, his brow furrowing. Foster's grip tightened on her rifle, sensing that something was very wrong. A doorway to what? I think. Carter hesitated, his face pale. It's connected to something much older than humanity. The Omen Lords, they weren't just gods or aliens. They were gatekeepers. This device isn't just a weapon. It's a bridge, a portal. Before anyone could respond, the walls around them began to hum. Faint at first, then growing louder. The ground shook, and the chamber's large metal doors groaned as they slid shut with a deafening screech. The light above flickered erratically, casting long, twisted shadows across the room. Foster spun around, aiming her weapon at the now-closed door. We need to move. Now. But it was too late. The alien energy in the air intensified, and in an instant, the chamber was bathed in a blinding white light. For a split second, everything went silent. Then the voice came. It was a low, resonating hum that filled the room, a sound that seemed to echo from deep within the bowels of the earth. It was both distant and all-encompassing, vibrating through their very bones. We are the Omen Lords. We are the heralds of the end. You have awakened us. The voice wasn't just heard. It was felt, like it was embedded in their minds, clawing at the edges of their consciousness. Foster stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. What is this? Carter gasped, looking at the artifact now glowing brightly in the center of the room. It's not just a weapon, it's a signal. Suddenly, the walls began to shift, revealing strange symbols, alien runes that pulsed with an unnatural energy. The floor beneath their feet cracked open, revealing a vast, dark void beneath them. The team backed away, but it was no use. The air itself seemed to warp and ripple. "We've opened it," Carter whispered. "We've opened a doorway to something far worse than the Thalarays." Foster's chest tightened with fear, but there was no time for hesitation. The team had come too far to turn back. The Omen Lords were coming, and now humanity's very survival depended on their ability to control the portal before it consumed them all. "We need to stop it. Now," Foster ordered, her voice hard with resolve. "Whatever comes through that door, we end it here." But as the light from the artifact intensified, she knew this was no longer a battle for survival alone. It was a war for the future of the human race itself. The chamber trembled as the alien energy surged, the air vibrating with an almost tangible force. Foster's mind raced as the glowing portal expanded, pulling them closer to the void. The symbols on the walls, alien runes, pulsed with sickly light, and a sense of dread, deeper than anything she had ever felt, washed over her. It was no longer just about surviving. Now they were fighting something older, something far more terrifying than the Thalarays. "We need to shut this thing down," Carter shouted, his voice laced with panic as he scrambled to rewire the artifact's control panel. Sweat dripped from his forehead, his hands trembling. Foster stepped forward, her rifle raised, but there was no sign of immediate danger. No Thalarays, no soldiers, but the air felt thick, as if it was charged with something alien, something hungry. She turned to Morales, who was watching the portal warily, his weapon ready but his face grim. "It's not just a weapon, is it?" Morales said, his voice low. "It's a damn gateway, and we've opened it." Carter nodded, still frantically working on the controls. The Omen Lords used this portal to invade countless worlds, including Earth. It's how they came to power. The Thalarays, they're just the enforcers. The Omen Lords are the architects of this destruction. Foster clenched her fists. "And we're just supposed to stop it. How do you fight gods?" Before Carter could respond, The ground beneath them shuddered violently. The walls crackled, and a deep, low growl echoed through the facility. The door they'd entered was now sealed shut, and from the depths of the void, a massive shadow began to form. "Get back!" Foster yelled, pushing Carter and Morales to the side as she took a step toward the opening portal. Her eyes darted around, but there was no cover, no way to escape. Whatever was coming through, they had no choice but to face it head-on. And then it emerged. A figure, no, a presence, began to coalesce from the darkness. It was vast, beyond human comprehension. Its form flickered and shifted, like a creature made of smoke and shadow. What they could make out were faint outlines of twisted, monstrous limbs, a silhouette that could have once been humanoid, but now was something far worse. Foster's breath caught in her throat as she raised her rifle and fired, but the bullets passed right through the creature, as though it were not bound by the laws of physics. "It's a projection," Carter said, eyes wide with fear. "A manifestation of the Omen Lord's power. They're trying to take control." The creature's eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with an unnatural light. It was watching them, evaluating them. Then its voice, an unsettling mixture of thousands of whispers, filled the room. "You have awakened us, humans. You dare challenge the Omen Lords. You are mere ants before us. The void will consume you, as it has all others." The ground beneath their feet cracked wide open, revealing a pit of darkness so deep it seemed to stretch forever. Foster could feel the pull of it, the hunger, the cold void calling to her. "No," she whispered, steadying herself. "We're not finished yet." The team was cornered. No amount of firepower would stop the entity now emerging from the depths of the portal. Carter had said they could control it, that they could stop the Omen Lords, but the truth was starting to settle in. They had no plan, no backup. This was their fight, and they had no choice but to find a way to win. "We shut it down, or we all die trying," Foster said, her voice steely. But even as she spoke, the entity lunged, its tendrils reaching for them with lightning speed. There was no more time to strategize. They had to act, or Earth's fate would be sealed before they even had a chance to understand what they were truly up against. "Cover me," Foster shouted. She rushed toward the central control mechanism, knowing that it was their last shot. If they didn't sever the connection now, they might never have another chance to stop the Omen Lords from returning to claim the Earth. Foster's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted toward the control panel, her injured leg screaming in protest. The void-like entity loomed behind her, its tendrils stretching out like dark rivers, snaking toward her and her team. The whispers filled her mind, thousands of voices, distant and angry, clawing at her thoughts. She ignored them, focusing on the task at hand. The control panel was just a few steps away, but the air felt heavier with every stride, like the very atmosphere was turning against her. "Foster, no!" Carter shouted from behind her, his voice barely audible over the sound of the creature's roiling, unnatural presence. "It's not just a switch. You can't just turn this off." "I don't care," Foster snapped, her voice raw. "We have to try." She reached the console, slamming her hand down on the panel's surface. The metal was cool, strangely smooth beneath her fingers, and as she worked to input the codes Carter had given her, a surge of alien energy flowed through the structure. The chamber trembled violently, and for a moment the air seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the entire facility went dark. The buzzing of machinery stopped. The whispers ceased. The creature's tendrils froze mid-air. Foster held her breath. Then, slowly, the lights flickered back to life. The room was silent. The air felt lighter. For a brief moment, it seemed like they had won, that they had stopped the portal, that the Omen Lords and their nightmare had been contained. But that's when she felt it, a coldness, not in the air, but deep inside her, like a hand gripping her soul. It wasn't the void anymore, but something else, something darker, more ancient. The walls shuddered, the ground rumbled beneath them, and then, with a terrifying groan, the massive metal doors at the back of the chamber slid open, revealing what lay beyond. What had been hidden here for eons? The air in front of them seemed to part, revealing a long-forgotten vault. Inside, etched into the stone walls, were carvings, symbols that sent a chill down Foster's spine. They were like the ones she had seen earlier, but these were far older, far more intricate. These. Carter's voice cracked, his eyes wide as he read the symbols. This is not just an archive. This is a prison. A prison, Foster repeated, her mind racing. Who? What's inside? Carter swallowed hard. The Thalrays were once human. At least, they were before the Omen Lords transformed them. This is where they were made. This is their origin. Foster's stomach turned. You're telling me we've unleashed them on Earth, but we've also opened a door to the place where they were created. Yes, Carter said, his voice growing smaller. And if the Omen Lords can fully awaken, this vault could become their stronghold. The Omen Lords don't just want to destroy humanity, they want to enslave it. They'd done it to thousands of worlds before. They're building an army here. They'd already started. As the truth of his words sank in, the ground shook again. But this time, it wasn't the portal or the creature. It was something worse, something far worse. From deep within the vault, a low, guttural growl resonated. It was an animalistic sound, filled with rage, and it sent a shockwave through the room. The walls cracked and splintered, and through the fissures, an array of figures began to emerge, creatures with twisted, half-human forms, their faces contorted in an eternal scream of agony. We need to get out of here. Now, Foster said, her voice deadly calm. But as they turned to retreat, the doorway they'd entered through slammed shut, locking them in. The creatures, humanoid, yet monstrous, advanced, their eyes burning with a malicious fire. The Omen Lords weren't just watching anymore. They were coming for them. And now, humanity's last hope had become their greatest curse. Foster's mind raced as she backed toward the shattered control panel, her team slowly forming a defensive line behind her. The vault had begun to shift, the walls alive with movement as the grotesque creatures began to stir, crawling and slithering from the shadows. Their bodies were twisted parodies of humanity, once men and women, now nothing more than living nightmares. The Omen Lords had turned them into soldiers of the void, and now their eyes locked onto the team with an almost predatory hunger. "We're not going to make it out of here," Morales said, his voice rough, his eyes flicking to the advancing monstrosities. He took aim and fired a burst of gunfire, but it passed right through one of the creatures, as though the bullets were no more than insects. These things aren't flesh and bone. They're something else. Carter. Foster shouted, turning toward the scientist. "Do you have any idea how to stop them?" Carter's face was pale, sweat dripping down his forehead as he typed furiously on his laptop. "They're not just physical. They're part of the Omen Lord's consciousness. If we can sever their connection to the portal, we might be able to stop them from fully manifesting here. But I don't know how much time we have before they're fully free." Foster didn't have time to process the implications of Carter's words. The creatures were getting closer, their distorted forms moving faster than they should have, Their limbs stretched unnaturally long. Each time one of them drew closer, it felt like the air thickened, as if the walls themselves were tightening, suffocating them. "Do what you can," Foster barked, her voice sharp with urgency. She raised her rifle again, firing at one of the creatures, but as before, the bullets didn't seem to have any effect. They only slowed it down, forcing it to stagger back for a moment before it lurched forward again. The room around them groaned as the vault began to collapse, its ancient foundations cracking under the weight of the emerging horrors. The team was running out of space, out of options, and the creatures weren't waiting for them to figure things out. They were moving in, surrounding them, closing the gap. "Foster," Carter shouted. "I need time. I need to access the core." Foster looked at the entrance to the vault. The doors had sealed themselves shut. No way in, no way out. They were trapped. "Morales, hold them off as long as you can," Foster ordered. She turned back to Carter, her voice hardening. "Carter, I swear to God, if you don't get that system up and running, we're all dead." Morales grunted, his gun blazing as he laid down a wall of fire, trying to push the creatures back. For a few moments it worked. The things recoiled, twisting their grotesque bodies in unnatural ways as they dodged the bullets. But it was clear that they were merely toying with them, biding their time before they attacked in earnest. "Just a few more seconds," Carter pleaded, sweat soaking his shirt, his hands shaking. "If I can override the core systems, we can sever the link between the portal and these things." Foster fired again, this time hitting one of the creatures square in the chest. It stopped, staggered, and then exploded into a burst of smoke and dark energy. But the others weren't far behind. They came at her with ferocity, their eyes filled with blind rage. "Carter," Foster shouted again, her voice trembling with the weight of desperation. "You've got seconds. Do it now." Then, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, Carter's fingers hit the final command. The ground shook, the walls groaned, and for a moment the vault went silent. Then a deep guttural roar ripped through the air, louder than any sound they had ever heard. The creature nearest to them screamed, its body writhing as it began to disintegrate, crumbling into ash and dark matter. The others followed suit, their forms unraveling and vanishing into nothingness, leaving behind nothing but the stench of decay. Foster didn't hesitate. She grabbed Carter by the arm and pulled him toward the remaining exit. "Get us out of here, Carter. Now." The scientist looked up at her, disbelief written all over his face, but there was no time for questions. The vault was coming apart at the seams. The entity had been severed, but there was no telling what else might be waiting to escape. Together, they rushed through the crumbling corridors, the facility shaking violently around them. The creatures were gone, but the Omen Lord's influence still hung heavy in the air. The battle wasn't over, far from it. But as they sprinted toward the surface, with the walls collapsing behind them, Foster knew one thing for certain. They had bought themselves a little more time. And time was all they had left. Foster, Carter, and Morales emerged from the collapsing facility, gasping for air as they stumbled into the oppressive heat of the Nevada desert. Behind them, the vault's entrance had caved in, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air, blotting out the sun for a moment. The shockwave of the explosion had knocked them all off their feet, but now, as they pulled themselves to their knees, the landscape seemed eerily still. For a moment, there was only silence. Foster's pulse was still racing, and her leg ached from the fall, but she pushed through the pain. She scanned the horizon, her gaze flicking between the barren landscape and the smoking ruins behind them. There was no sign of the Thalraes or their alien forces. No sign of the Omen Lords. Yet, the faint hum of the portal's power lingered in the back of her mind, like an echo of something far worse to come. Carter was hunched over, his hands on his knees, still catching his breath. We actually did it," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "We shut it down. We stopped them." Morales, who had been silent since their escape, finally spoke, his voice a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. "But we haven't won. Not really. You heard what those things said. This wasn't just a portal. It's a signal, a beacon. They're calling to the Omen Lords. And once they find out we've stopped their gateway, they won't stop coming." Foster's eyes narrowed, the weight of Morales' words sinking in. They hadn't just been fighting for survival, they had been fighting for a future. The Omen Lords were ancient, and their reach was vast. Stopping the portal had merely slowed them down. But the war was far from over. "We don't know where they'll strike next," Carter said, standing up slowly, wiping his brow. "They have worlds, armies, technology. We're just a speck to them." "We may be a speck," Foster said, her voice hardening with resolve. "But we're their speck now. The Omen Lords made a mistake underestimating humanity. They thought we were weak, disorganized. But they've only seen the beginning." A sharp wind blew across the desert, kicking up the dust and carrying it toward the mountains in the distance. But the quiet was shattered by the sound of distant engines. Foster turned to look, her eyes narrowing. In the far distance, a convoy of military vehicles appeared on the horizon, kicking up a trail of dust as it sped toward them. Foster's heart skipped a beat. These were no Thalraes ships. These were human-made. "Command," she said, her tone a mixture of relief and anticipation. "We're not alone. We're still in the fight." The convoy drew closer, revealing a mix of armored trucks and mobile command units. The flags of the U.S. military, along with several allied nations, waved above the convoy. They had come, not just to rescue the survivors, but to mount a counter-offensive. Foster stood up straighter, her posture filled with newfound determination. The battle for Earth was far from over. They had seen the enemy, felt its terrible pallor, but now they had a chance to push back. The Omen Lords might have thought they could break humanity, but they hadn't counted on one thing. Humans never gave up. "We've still got time," Foster muttered to herself, her eyes hard as she looked toward the convoy. "And we're going to use every second of it." Carter and Morales, their fatigue momentarily forgotten, straightened beside her. They were with her. They were ready. "Let's show them what happens when you mess with humanity," Morales said, his voice filled with fierce conviction. The convoy reached them, stopping in a cloud of dust. Soldiers poured out, rushing to assess the situation and offer medical aid. But Foster barely noticed. She kept her gaze on the horizon, where the shadows of the mountains met the sky. The Omen Lords had tried to bring the end to Earth, but humanity had just begun to fight back. And this time, they would not be caught off guard. Together, they would make their stand. And this was only the beginning.